Hello, everyone. As part of the Malta Sustainable Development Action Days and the European Sustainable Development Action Week in 2025, we are proud to launch today our online campaign, Designing Tomorrow Together. At NWAMI International Malta, we are dedicated to building inclusive, sustainable communities by linking multicultural integration with environmental and social responsibility. Our work brings together people of diverse backgrounds to promote social cohesion, reduce inequalities, and foster environmental stewardship through education, art, awareness raising, and practical initiatives, community-based initiatives, such as food waste families, food waste reduction, sustainable living projects, and our culture cafes introducing and discussing cultures, customs, and values and traditions. I'm Maria-Gabriele Doublesin, President and co-founder of NWAMI International Malta, and I'm especially delighted to welcome Dr. Britta Boyer from Loughborough University, London, where she's a visiting scholar with the Institute of Creative Futures. She teaches and researches how design can be more sustainable and responsible for both people and the planet. Britta's work shows how creative ideas can reduce waste, protect resources, and bring communities together. Hello, Britta. Welcome, and thank you for agreeing to do this discussion round, this interview together.
Thank you for the invite, Gabby. It's nice to be here.
Britta, let me start with a question. You are part of the platform Design Ecologies, which emphasizes creative sustainability on a global scale. So how do you see circular design principles being adopted to Malta? In Malta's specific context, especially in tackling challenges like textile waste and marine plastics and other marine wastes.
So thank you for the question and the complexity within the questioning. So I think what's really important with any lens is to be very clear that I do not position myself as an expert in Malta. You know, what I do is I have skills to understand how to do the research, to work with other experts that might have a deeper knowledge than myself. So I think that's important to understand that. And also that I do have experience of working with island ecologies. I have this transnational experience working with Indonesia, and a lot of that knowledge that has formed a lot of the academia and the research that I do can be applied or can be drawn upon in the Maltese context. So I did do some quick ethnography, which means that I have tried to look at, you know, some of the resources that could be applied within Malta. And there are some, you know, it's the perfect environment for other European initiatives and academic partnership. And so the first question that you asked me was specifically about how to bring in these circular ideas, wasn't it? That, would you be able to repeat that?
Yeah, how do you see circular design principles that could be adapted to Malta? I mean, from you as a researcher in a global context.
Yeah, so I think
Looking for suggestions, as a matter of fact, or to ideas, and even know a little bit about these circular principles, because we know very little about design ecology. And so if you extend a little bit on your experience on your work.
yeah. So I think what's really important to understand, you know, this notion of circular design gets thrown around a little bit without people really understanding. And say we take a simple idea such as a garment, how can the circular design system be applied to that? Very difficult, because actually clothing, quite often is made on the other side of the world in communities which we don't know, being controlled by a factory worker or a factory owner that we don't know the conditions in which, well, we do now. There's a lot of evidence and a lot of research of the inequalities in the clothing system. So I think, first of all, it's about unpicking these terminologies that we use that all too easily get applied in different contexts without fully understanding. So for that reason, I like to work with a sustainability principles of Michael Ben-Eli, which is this kind of more action-oriented ideas of sustainability. And really look at the context, working with experts on the ground, understanding, what are the problem spaces in each different. So, for example, in Malta, what are the island's constraints and advantages? How could Malta draw upon other EU projects? What is Malta doing really well? There must be lots of things. I was there recently and I saw that the waste collection was really impressive compared to what I've seen elsewhere. So it's really looking at what is, and then looking at the invisibility and the relationships of what isn't, but also speaking with experts. And I think, one of the, let's go to the kind of textile waste and the marine plastics that you were talking about. I will refer to my notes if that's okay, because, in this kind of quick research that I did, I found out that there are some existing processing, but I think one of the main things to consider is infrastructure. What is the infrastructure there? You can come up with a million ideas, but if there's not resources, investment, and infrastructure, the projects will fail. So in terms of textile waste, are there collection hubs? Is there retail take-back schemes? We know in other places in the world where there are retail take-back schemes that they don't work. They end up dumped in the Chilean desert or in, markets in Africa, which cause environmental issues elsewhere. So, that's again goes back to the infrastructuring needed. Are there local, sorting hubs? Is there spinning and, weaving opportunities with these textile wastes? I was working in the 90s with a rag trade, and there was a whole industry around rag trades, and this, John Parkinson was pioneering and reweaving post-consumer denim waste, and I was working with him to create new materials. So does Malta have a kind of heritage making that, textile waste could be rewoven into new materials? And in terms of like marine plastics, again, looking at examples elsewhere where abandoned nets, fishing nets and things can be converted into yarns and new products. Is there partnerships with other textile and technology that could be brought to Malta? I think it's really about looking at what is existing elsewhere, in the international communities, and partnering, with universities in Malta, with researchers. I know there's researchers in this space, and education, the three, industry, research, and education. That's a great partnership to see what can come, the possibilities that can come from that.
Yeah, these are very good questions and very interesting suggestions that will require a follow-up and a deeper look into, and the suggestion for partnering in partnerships to expand on these questions. Today we are here to raise awareness and provoke thought on that topic. We are not here to answer questions raised. This is for the public, for the viewers who see that, but to think for yourselves or the industries you're in and see what are we doing now and what can be done. So I thank you very much for these very relevant questions that you just articulated, and as an inspirational thought to follow up, especially for the educational systems, the higher education and the research community as well, and to partner and collaborate internationally. So,
Absolutely.
You just mentioned also how materials are there. Is there anything done yet? So delving a little bit deeper into local materials, what can we specifically look at? What role could byproducts like olive, pips, grapes, or carob and Malta's heritage craft play in building sustainable solutions, just as a follow-up to the questions you positioned before, you know?
Yeah, so I think what's really important is to look at why we call it waste, look at that first, and I refer back to this idea that waste is a result of what we think, feel, and do. And actually, if we reframe the idea of waste as a resource rather than something to be discarded, it creates endless possibility. And I like to work in that space of possibility and to activate that in others. What can we do with these materials? And something like heritage crafts, is very important for an island like Malta because it's about creating capability as well as opportunity in new products. And what I mean by capability is there are existing crafts, aside from the ones that you mentioned, like the lace, Lutsu boat building, masonry. And I would imagine, like elsewhere, craft heritage, this tacit knowledge that people have, that elders hold, it's really important to keep those skills alive. So partnering again, preserving those skills through storytelling is also another element of a heritage futures, but also sustainability. How do we keep that alive? How do we keep people's interest? And how do we create employment and trading relationships through those? Equally, if we look at the waste and the olive byproducts, the grape, the carob, these three that you mentioned.
Yeah,
And
the olive pips, carobs, but also like the fishnets, for example, found in the sea, and other waste or textile waste, for example.
yeah, so I think, there are opportunities rather than seeing them as waste, there are opportunities. But I think it has to be, incentivized because, like elsewhere, a lot of times, if talking to these communities, say the fishermen or the winemakers or people working with carob or people working with olive, we have to understand why the waste is being created. I think I wouldn't want to ever assume that I knew why. It might be that there's no resources or there's no investment opportunity or capital to create the infrastructure needed to deal with the waste. But what I can say is that, elsewhere, fishing nets have been, made into soles for trainers. And this is a huge economy to tap into. And actually, the fishing net possibilities also speaks to this idea elsewhere, in Europe, this blue economy that is very important. I'm just referring to some of my notes. The key aspects of the blue economy, is emphasizing sustainability and the use of ocean and coastal resources for economic and is sustainable livelihood. So there's an opportunity to create storytelling around this and to tap in to other European islands and awareness building around these wastes, and how that could create additional opportunities, say for the fishing communities. If instead of discarding the fishing nets into the seas, if they know that there's policy or incentives that could help them and work with the technology to turn that into nylon threads or the trainer. So I do know other people in the, colleagues in Southeast Asia that are working with Nike and Adidas, for example, working with those materials and plastic wastes that are ending up on beaches and, creating flooding issues, for example, now in Indonesia. So, the grape, the carob, they all have opportunity. They are materials that have and carry opportunity for story and for regenerative design practices.
When I listen to you, a memory comes to mind. A couple of years ago, when I lived in Egypt, from our international community, there was a fair, and there was a lady from South Asia, and she was designing and making handbags from coconuts.
Wow.
From the outer part of the coconut. And it was so, and I purchased it is an evening handbag, a small handbag, and it is very, very beautiful. She made this hard shell of the coconut. She's made it small and like the bits and pieces, and from there she structured. She created this handbag and the hanger of the handbag as well. So and this is very special to me. So when thinking of the rind of the coconut of the carob, yeah, or
Yeah,
for example olive pips, the pits of the olive, I'm sure there are ways that can be used for reproduction. And here comes the fashion and the designing as well, how to use that waste products to, let's say, waste in hyphens. And this fits exactly into what you mentioned before. Waste is a result of what you think and what you do, what we think and what we do. I mean, in that sense, it's not waste anymore.
absolutely. Well, what we
We can
think
call it a
feel,
byproduct. Waste turned into a byproduct or into a resource. And it requires some creative thought and innovation to come up with how to utilize, how to use these resources for that.
absolutely. I mean, I think olive, I did a little bit of scanning and research on what, for example, olive pomace and mill wastewater are rich in bioactive and can be valorized into things like cosmetics or biocomposites or soil treatment. So there's a huge opportunity there for anyone working in olives, if they're not doing it already. And then grape, and wine industry residues can be processed into fiber fillers, biomass pellets, natural pigments, so for dyeing materials or products, and also feedstocks, and for bioplastics or adhesives. And that's really important too, because quite often these sustainable solutions that we find within design, would need adhesives, which can be very toxic to the environment. So, the fact that grape could offer a solution that would be non-toxic is an opportunity.
A sustainable alternative.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So in that sense, again, waste is a resource, and which needs an infrastructure, or the building of an infrastructure, or rethinking, a complete rethinking how we utilize these resources. Now, taking it a little bit further, how do you think educational systems, such as schools and young people, can contribute to this, and how can they get more involved in circular design and climate action?
I think for me, I'm a big advocate for creativity. That is central to all of my work, and I strongly believe that every human being has this innate possibility and talent, to come up with solutions for our own worlds, and to cultivate that creativity in each human being, because we definitely need the diversity of solutions in the polycrisis that we are facing as humanity. So working with young people where this creativity is still in them, there's still this playfulness, this wonder about the world, is a great way to look at untapped ideas for sustainability. And I think really the emphasis on making and getting young people involved, for example, young reporter schemes, that could be part of a curriculum where you get, you create this role playing where young people go out into the communities and interview and find, what are the problems here? What does the community need? So it's that engagement, it's getting off our screens. I'm very grateful that we have the screen, because they also create opportunity for us. Equally, I think they remove the need that we have as humans to keep things and keep them making alive. So getting young people out there in real life, working with materials, the action element of sustainability is very important. Looking at ways in which young people in education could create competitions, or working with industry, look at incentives, or what are the entry points, what are the barriers to people understanding sustainability. I don't think we can ever assume, so it's creating these dialogues, creating repair and upcycle clubs, teaching people how to repair their clothes. Young
Fantastic.
people throw away things, with Shein and all these fast fashion. We've got piles in our household.
Absolutely. These suggestions are so precious and worth to follow up. Now, coming to the end of our discussion today, let's focus on some key takeaways from our discussion. The main insights: circular design success depends on understanding local context, infrastructure, and partnerships rather than applying generic global solutions. Malta might do good in reframe waste as valuable resources. Textile waste, marine plastics, and agricultural byproducts, olive grapes, carob, all have potential. With regards to heritage and crafts and local capabilities, lace making, boat building, as you mentioned, can be leveraged for sustainable innovation. And then there is a strategic approach to consider maybe as well in assessing existing infrastructure before implementing new solutions. And what you said, building partnerships between industry, research, and education. And the focus and what you brought out more is you mentioned a lot storytelling and economic opportunities to drive adoption and consider international collaboration while maintaining local relevance. Are there any concluding thoughts you would like to add before we wrap up this conversation?
So yeah, I think that really all of that is encapsulated in the SDG 17, which is all about relationships. And so for me, I think, keeping things in that relational realm, that stories help people to understand complexity. They also help people to understand consequences and action and imagine sustainable futures. So the element of creative art practices central to build emotional resonance, empathy, and connect communities together. Is very important. Finding the right people that can facilitate that. It's all about people at the end of the day that can bring community together or break communities, right? And so really creating those dialogues and speaking to people on the ground, and drawing upon Malta's very, very rich cultural positioning in the Mediterranean. I think this is really important. There's such rich storytelling to draw upon. And products designed in that context are the vessels to carry those stories. They then create, trading relationships. And if you embed in the product itself sustainability, there's a value to that product that then can be carried through in the trading relationships too, creating an equality in those trading relationships. And, there's an opportunity for Malta, if we're speaking about that particular context, to pioneer some of this. I think island communities can pioneer things because they are a hub of international relations and diversity.
What would you say to the viewer? What final thought would you give to our viewer who hears this, who watches our discussion? Is there any suggestions, thoughts, message of encouragement?
I think the main encouragement I would give is to not be stopped by the language of sustainability. Sometimes I think people don't know how they can have an impact.
Yeah.
Which is why sometimes stripping that language away and just going, okay, so let's talk about creativity then and look at problems and creativity in that sustainable space, to really activate, what's important, what you value, and to bring forward that value system into the material world, whether that's in your relationships, in your purchasing power, to pay attention, to where the money flows, and to put our attention to things that really matter, which are our relationships with other human beings and our relationship with the environment.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Britta Boyer. It was a pleasure to have you and for your very thoughtful and inspirational contribution.
Oh, thank you so much, Gabby, for inviting me here today and for this talk. And I hope that there's something in our discussion that touches people's hearts.